This is a special honor for me to be able to host this here at Camera Image. I've been coming here, I think, about 6 years, and the idea of the community of, I think it was over 80 countries are represented here. And my colleagues from Europe have been here for many years, and we started coming, and now we are joined by several members from Japan that come. And the whole idea is to be part of the festival and to learn and listen from what it is that you guys want, what do you like about our current products, what you like to see in future products. So that is a big, important part of what happens here at the festival for Sony. And one of those developments was a long time coming with working with Ed and Marco, and it's been just very, very happy to be able to show it here. And I won't go too much into it. I won't steal too much of the thunder. They'll go much more into it than I have. But tonight we have Marco Massinger. And Ed Lachman, ASE. And I'm just Dan Perry with Sony. With that, we will jump into it.
So yeah, thank you very much for that introduction, Dan. It was a long time where we were talking about EL zone system and monochromatic cameras here, and we're especially happy that we're Sony's guests now this evening for a very special occasion. But before we go into those wonderful news, we actually plan to talk a bit about lighting and light and shadow, and go through the wonderful work Ed did over the past decades, especially in this very special year, with him getting honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award. And I think with us being already a bit late, we just jump right in, Ed. Or do you want to say something yourself for the beginning?
My appreciation. I really talked about the EL zone system probably over 10 years ago, starting at this festival. And Sony was responsive and have been encouraging, and now it's come to fruition. So I can't thank Sony enough. I'm honored. And this is absolutely the best home for the EL zone system, because the different cameras that they have and how this can be implemented in their family. So thank you so much.
So, and when we're talking Sony, we're talking Japan, and when we're talking Japan and Ed, then we're talking Wim Wenders, and roughly talking movie that was shot 40 years ago, which was Tokyo Ga. So Ed, you brought some images. We selected some impressions. Can you explain to us what was Tokyo Ga about?
Well, Wim Wenders, there was a week that was like a cooperation, and they brought 3 German filmmakers, Werner Herzog, Helma Sanders, and Wim Wenders, and he brought me along, and we made a film out of kind of nothing. It was just the 2 of us, and we walked around Tokyo, and we made a film about images, about Ozu and lost images in Japan. And the first image is his cinematographer, Asuka, who, interestingly enough, never made a film after. He tried to, but he was so devoted to Ozu that after Ozu died, he said he tried to shoot another film, but he couldn't. And so it's a beautiful story, his relationship with Ozu. And this actor was the father of Japanese cinema of Ozu. So anyway, we did an interview with him, and this is a shot, and it was shot in 16 millimeter. And I guess the reason we thought about showing images up until we show you the EL zone system, how it operates, is that I want to show you like how I thought about lighting and images how I came to the idea of really basically using Ansel Adams' concept, using an analog interpretation of exposure and how you could adapt that into the digital world. So you can just...
So we got some...
Well, that's their bullet train.
Can we bring the lights down a little bit?
So...
Oh, and this is this great place. We ended up, the pachinko parlors, and people actually make a living. They play these games with the little balls, and if they get a lot of the balls, they can get food or liquor or clothes. I don't know if are they still in Tokyo, the pachinko parlors? Yeah?
Ueda-san agrees.
Yeah.
Can we take the lights down just a little bit more? Is it splashing on the screen? Are you guys okay?
Well, it'd be great if they could. Yeah, turn the lights off.
There's so much about illuminating stories.
I'd be very happy if those would go down.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Ed, with...
Wait, we don't need lights. They could just hear our disembodied voice. All right, go.
So, talking about a film like Tokyo Ga and exposing 40 years ago, we noticed during our seminars in the past years, people are still, even the young generation, is still very happy using spot meters. What was your approach back then? What stock did you use there? And how did you cope with the challenges of shooting a documentary in 16?
What I find interesting, even my daughters here, and that they still want to understand what the analog world is. And I believe that if you understand how you expose a negative in film, you're a better cinematographer when you're in the digital world, because then you understand ratio and you understand ASA and all the elements that we use to create an image really comes out of what we understand in the analog world. So now this is an interesting story. He would call this the tatami mat. Ozu would shoot very low to the ground, and he only shot with a 50 millimeter. And his cinematographer told this story that when American cinematographers came to Japan after the war, that they had a whole box of lenses. And he would always say to Ozu, oh, could we use a 40 millimeter or a 32? And then Ozu would say to him, no, not this shot. And so he always shot all his stories with a 50 millimeter lens from the ground. And this was, again, we were walking around, and it was the Cherry Blossom Festival, where the companies, they come and they have a picnic, basically, a party, and they invite you to sit with them and have lunch.
So from documentary, a drastic jump 15 years ahead into the scripted narrative world. The Virgin Suicide's a beautiful movie. You want to say something how it came to be?
Well, I talked about this the other day. Basically, this was Sofia Coppola's first film, and narrative film, and she wrote the script based on the book, Eugene Onid's book, and she wrote it on spec, and then she found she got money to make the film. So anyway, you can look at the image. So I'm sure you know the story about this family, the Lisbon family, and these girls. So, you know, here, if I had the EL zone system, and the funny thing is, I just shot a film we saw here, Maria, and it was shot, we went back to film, because we were in Budapest, and there's a lab there, and I tried to figure out, is there any way I could use the EL zone system on film? But I couldn't, because there's too many other factors, the lab and there's too many other factors that aren't controllable, which is controllable in a digital camera. So what's so wonderful is I could have tracked the exposure and the highlights and the shadow to understand where my exposure is with the EL zone system.
We go into that later on, but we already discussed that during breakfast. You could have brought a Venice 2 as a spot meter. So when we're talking EL zone system, but probably Sony also thinks about more compact solutions using it. We have some close-up here. Yeah, just probably some more interesting thing with a bit of color here.
Yeah, so I always, talk about how I use color as a psychological element rather than just a decorative element, and it also works very well when you use the EL zone system because it understands exposure, whatever color you're looking at.
So, and with those girls planning ahead for their collective suicide, you got even stronger in color?
Yeah, now, this is a place where in film it's always difficult of how you play reflection over wanting to see through the reflection. And this is something that I found another advantage with the tracking through the EL zone system, that then you really can see the difference in the exposure of how you can hold the contrast between the images. And it's something in film that was always guesswork.
So, and you could not only see like the contrast of like specular highlights, but it was always also about like your dynamic range and the detail in the highlights in scenes like that. You want to go a bit into detail, like?
Well, all right, so let's say like the window here, all right? So generally there are places where you want to read some detail in the window. So again, when I apply the EL zone system, I can know exactly how much information I have in the highlights. And that's always something that people worry about in the digital world, and also in the shadow area. But so in extremes, you can be you can understand, but also feel safe about where you're placing your negative. Again, in film, I would have done this with a spot meter, and I used to take Polaroids and write it in a book and then reference it. But the nice thing in the digital world is that you can know where your stop is, so you can be consistent in the window in this room or a window in the next room, so you can be consistent where the exposure is between different spaces.
And only briefly later, you joined forces with Steven Soderbergh and followed another female protagonist for a very, very successful movie, Erin Brockovich, but chose a substantially different approach on the movie. So, can you tell us a bit about that project?
I said this today because we showed it today. Here was a film where a $20 million actress, and Steven wanted to shoot it like it was a low-budget film. So I figured out in 50 days, she made more money than I did by lunch. But anyway, the nice thing is when you're lighting and you're using real light and your own light, again, the EL zone will help you understand the ratio between the real light, the real sunlight here, and how to place how much ambience to create an image.
And when we're talking interiors and practicals?
Yeah, here I always like in an image, in a film, to let the highlights burn out in a lamp. So when I put a light in, which was over Julia Roberts' shoulder, you believe that light from the practical, the lamp, could have lit their faces. So again, in the digital world, I know how much detail is in this the shade of the lamp versus what the light is on their face. So, you know, I did this all through experience, and I'm sure, you know, there's very competent cinematographers here that would do it the way I did it because of experience. But what this, I think it's a great training tool for younger people, so they start to understand ratio if they're not shooting film, you know, so that has that aspect of it.
And we again see a lot of contrast, a lot of brightness, a lot of highlights in the image.
Yeah, like, you know, if I wanted to read more detail outside there, then obviously we would have brought the light up inside. But again, because this was a naturalistic film and he wanted the film to look like basically an independent low-budget film, I let the windows go overexposed, because that's what you would end up, you know, being in that situation, and, you know, you would just pick an exposure and just live with it.
So, going to some...
So here's a situation where I worked with this gaffer for 30 years, John DeBlau, and we would always find things in the set that made it unique in itself. So the way that highlight hits that woman there, we actually saw how it hit a glass, which you don't see off camera. And so we'd move the light around till we found that reflection. And I like to work a lot that way, where you move the light in the scene and find out where it gives a character to the look.
So, and you did a very similar thing in this close-up, lighting her hair.
Yeah, and actually Connie Hall talked about this a long time ago, where he said, you know, just because someone doesn't always sit in light unless you're in your movie, right? So you light an area in the room that the reflection of the light gives you the light for the rest of the scene, and you let that part burn out.
So going to a more low contrast.
Yeah, this was, again, at night, and I don't know if we have other images, but usually at night, I like to work off of what's existing in the environment, because then I don't have to artificially light everything around the person. So for me, the face is the most important, and then I base the lighting around the face. So certainly in a car at night, you know, by this time we've given up the idea of lighting in the car for the person, like it's the dashboard, which looks pretty phony. And it's always a light now from the outside of the car that could be the ambient light that's lighting the person inside the car. But I always kept that as low as possible, so I pick up the lighting outside the car. And again, in digital world, in the EL zone, was a godsend, because again, you're going to see how much detail, and it isn't something that you're exposing at the exposure. You know, you have a flesh tone, a stop, even 2.5 stops down. So the other beauty of shooting digitally is that you can place the face not at exposure, but underexposed, and know you have the information.
So, and here we see an approach that is not too much different from the hair topic. Yeah,
the same thing. You're letting the source lighting be also the ambient light, and not worry that it's going to burn out in that area, because that's the way your eye would see an image, that per se.
And what would be really interesting, like even the halo of on her arm, like besides the area that would burn out, would be perfectly present in the EL zone system. So especially for high contrast and, let's say, more courageous lighting scenarios like that, EL zone system would have proved.
And once you know what the latitude of the sensor is, so that's an advantage, because we would always figured out what the range of a negative is. So now we can find out the range of the sensor, and then you can play within that range to create an image.
And the cool thing about EL's own system is you see it instantly. Like you turn it on and it's your instant dynamic range test. That's probably also why some other manufacturers sometimes have a challenge implementing it because it makes cameras instantly comparable.
And then a couple of my fellow cinematographers that I talked to early on about the EL zone, they go, well, I don't use a light meter. It's great, you know, idea, but, you know, I do it by eye. So I said, yeah, but what happens when you have to come back and reshoot a scene or shoot a part of the scene over? If you can record that, you could have a representation of exactly what the exposure is over the whole frame. And they go, oh, I could use that. You know, because the whole thing, like with the waveform monitor or a histogram, is it shows you where your highlights and your shadows, but it doesn't give you the specific areas of what you're looking at. So the beauty of this is when you do a frame grab, you know exactly where the stop is in relation to the objects that you're looking at. Oh, and this is just playing with different color temperature. And again, you know, different color temperature changes how you read an image, you know, in exposure. So again, the zone system will allow you to actually see what that effect is.
And it's also very important that with digital cameras, they behave quite different than celluloid. So it doesn't necessarily mean because one of your red, green, and blue channels is clipping that all of them are clipping. And this can lead to, yeah, let's say very interesting sensor behavior, especially in post-production, to a lot of hassle for our wonderful colorists. So in that regards, there will be like even further like thoughts and ideas about the zone system where you can even help in those cases and be even more precise down the road. And we really encourage you also to give us feedback down the road, because this environment here over the past like 6, 7, 8 years has been a wonderful place to also collect ideas how to further develop and improve what we're doing here. So jumping to Carol, probably my favorite of all those movies, 2015, 60 millimeter.
Well, all right, so again, you know, here the zone system would help you understanding where to place the exposure for reflection and how much detail you have. And another thing to touch on is, you know, the problem with IRE for me was it was never a way to communicate to the gaffer or even in post. We talk in stops. Lenses are in stops. Our meters were in stops. And the way we talk in a lighting situation, you know, put a scrim, a full, a half. But it's the same way you talk in post. You know, when we would talk to the lab, you know, we'd say, how far overexposed am I, you know, or am I underexposed more than 2 stops? Now everybody has the language. There's been a lot of post houses that have adopted the EL zone system because now they have a communication with the cinematographer, the image maker, that we can all talk in the same language. Well, this was another, we shot through a plexiglass window in this restaurant.
So there were a lot of windows in Carol.
Again, a lot of reflections.
So essentially everything we have about Carol, it was about windows, reflections, and depth that you created with it. You want to go a bit further into what you try to achieve there color-wise?
Not really.
That is how you plan things. So yeah, jump ahead to...
So this was the first film that I was able to use. Small HD were the first, you know, major organization, you know, we're going to say company to embrace it. And for me, it's still better that a camera manufacturer has it in the camera because you have less user error and it's going to be more precise. I don't want to say that small HD, but they're precise. But the amount of work that Sony has put into this, even there was an ad that came out with small HD, and they didn't do it exactly right. And Sony got in touch with me right away. Did you change anything? They understood, even the ad, what was right or wrong about their ad. So thank you.
So actually, a graphics artist was going right, like EL's own system on small HD works perfectly, but there was somebody trying to make things look cooler, and they made the scale completely blue in the ad. So it was just an artist going rogue. Not small HD engineering. But it cost us some heartache, and Sony was actually faster than us to catch it. Very interesting with El Conde was, because I was involved in that project myself, we used a prototype camera. We built a prototype camera in a very short amount of time for Netflix. And especially if you have a tool that you don't have tremendous amount of time to test. Like a tool like, and this was a monochromatic camera, black and white only camera with no buyer pattern. It proves incredibly helpful if you have a tool that also an environment in Chile where you probably not have access to everything that you're used to. You have a tool where you can, independently from the quality of your monitor panel, from what the camera is doing, can just judge exposure. Like you have essentially with a 4K signal, you have 8.3 million spot meters. So that was also very reassuring for you, wasn't it? Especially in those high contrast.
What I found out, they didn't have the time to test really what the ASA of the sensor was. So again, the zone system, I could track it, and 800 really was 1280. It was about 3/4 of a stop faster, and 1280 was 2000. So I think there was some resistance when I originally approached some other manufacturers because they realized that you would realize where the exposure was, what the latitude of their sensor was for whatever they said it was. And Sony was always very honest about it, and they're very true to what the sensor is.
So looking at El Conde, there was a lot of contrast in that movie because it was all about contrast in the black and white movie. So you want to go a bit into detail into those reflections?
This would be a very difficult shot to know you had the information on his face, and then the contrast outside in a reflection. That's not a post shot. That was in camera. So I was really surprised that I could read that and know that I had that image.
So and till this date, like small HD screens are for many camera systems the only solution to have EL's own system available. It even works with very small and compact camera systems like the Sony FX3 or A7S line. So I highly encourage you to try it out because small HD monitors are probably more widely accessible. Atomos as well. And Pomford will follow with their products, but those are probably more widely accessible as Venice 2s.
So then same thing with the windows, and then holding the detail or not holding the detail, because this was a set. So I wanted it to feel like it was a natural location, a real location. So I took the liberty of really burning the windows out. So there was no question what was out there, being a set. Right. And then here's again, this was real sunlight. I couldn't light this better. And I saw it and I said, oh, we got to go, Pablo, let's shoot now. And again, but at least I knew I had that much information in the highlights that I could get away with it. So in documentaries, I think the zone system is a godsend because you can make choices very, on the fly. You can make choices where your exposure is, and again, have the confidence that you have an image. So this is the wider shot, and the windows are really burned out in this location. Now this was something interesting. Well, it doesn't really get into the zone system, but you know, they always say you can do everything in post, right? Well, we were losing the light, and I shot a lot with black and white filters, you know, 23A and orange filters and whatever. And here I didn't. And so I lost the contrast between the sky and her neck. And if you really see this image close, you start to get a halation. I couldn't really marry the two images properly. And so again, using filters, again, using the zone system, it can help you understand what you're getting out of the negative or the sensor.
Still, the zone system provided you the information that the detail that was brought back in the sky was actually there, and that you had something to grab on in post-production to bring all that sky down. That was probably, yeah, it was too late to use a red filter. Yeah, so, yeah, and then we show you some examples of how the EL zone and El Conde were actually working together. Actually, all those are iPhone clips courtesy of Ed.
I just put my iPhone on.
So this is how it actually looked and felt on set.
Los improperios y acción.
And you see the small HD screen down there. Giving you essentially that exposure heat map.
So one place that again, Pablo likes smoke, and smoke can really fool you in exposure. Sometimes it can add exposure, and sometimes it can take exposure away. It's the situation you're in. Generally, when you put light through smoke, you decrease the exposure, and when you're looking at the smoke from the front, it's adding exposure. So again, the zone was really helpful for me to know how much detail or information I could have using smoke. Because the smoke is always a confusion a lot of times about what you're really getting. Especially like in this scene, there's a lot of fire. So the green that you're looking at is a half to a stop down. Obviously the purple and to black is there's no information. The purple is you have some information. And then when we're going up to the guillotine, there's fire there. But there is information there that by eye on a monitor you would never know. You see the gray around it, that's 18% gray. So there is information there. So there's a stop down. The blue is like 3 or 4 stops down to the purple. That's the way it would have looked on the monitor. So even though that white looks like it's burned out on the monitor, there's information there. I think that's really it on that shot. All right, now here was a situation when it was night outside by the time we got to shoot this. So again, I just burned out the window as much as I could. Go and then you'll see how far. Do you want to?
Yeah, yeah.
So the red, it's burnt out. There's no information there.
White, there would be no information. Red is still there.
Well, yeah, it's pretty gone. Yeah. So so anyway, that's the way I used it to understand how to make it look like.
Oh, sorry.
So what's the next?
It's running. Clip is still running.
He reminded me, red, we do have detail. But there's white in there. And the bars on the top, that was a change that you all made and told me. I flipped it, that generally you're used to the overexposed, the brighter on the right side. So that was changed.
So, going to Maria, the most recent movie that you actually didn't use EL Zone system on, but we call this Illuminating Stories. So we actually brought the most samples and also the most behind-the-scene pictures from Maria to dive a bit deeper into your lighting approach of that movie that also was shown here. Probably you want to go a bit into your camera choice. Super 8 versus Super 35?
No, that's 35 black and white. So what's interesting is the courtyard of this building. It was like, it was being renovated, and they let us build our set on one of the floors. But it was, those were the space. What are those X's? Yeah, and then the lights, and then you see the circular.
Sky panel X.
Yeah, the circular area is her dressing area.
Like
when you see inside, yeah.
Lower right.
So they're vortex, basically the vortex lights on the
right. Vortex that were like essentially Sky panel X.
And then those were 4K or those were 6K parts.
Yeah. It's kindly provided Sky panel X by Ari prototypes. But they're like vortex.
So I had the light, this location all from the exterior because we were using such wide lenses at 21, 24, or even sometimes a 14. So everything was lit through. Now, go to the, so again, the same thing with the information in the window. Now, I discovered something that I didn't really know, and they had double curtains, and so the advantage of the double curtain is that it spread the light so you didn't get a highlight in one part of the curtain, and it also I found helped the detail in the curtains, and we were discussing this earlier. In other words, sometimes I'm on somebody's set and I see they have a light very close to the diffusion to, let's say, a 12 by 12 or an 8 by 8, and they just keep putting diffusion in front of the light. Well, that doesn't help. It just knocks the light down. If you want a softer light, you have to have the light back far enough so it fills the space, and then you can double, diffuse it, and it will soft. You always have to fill the space that you're lighting to have the light be softer than a hard light, one light next to the curtain. So, I mean, that light was probably 15 feet away from the curtain. and then she opens the curtain, and this light splashes in on her. And then the return on hers, I just had a muslin, a soft muslin tacked to the wall, so you got a little more fill. But again, this is something I did through my experience, but it's more hair-raising. If I had shot this digitally, I would have known how much information was on her face. That's why it's much more difficult to shoot film, because you have to pre-visualize the way you understand or think the negative is going to see the image. Digitally, you're seeing what you have. So that's another advantage in a lot of ways with digital. And so the beauty of the zone is that you can recreate exactly what you did because you have a record of it now.
But when you check your digital camera, as pointed out earlier, you could bring your Venice 2 on set as a spot meter. And actually, if you test your film, you could actually determine your exposure for the film from your digital camera, no matter if it's a Venice 2 or whatever camera you want to use, because that was the whole idea about EL Zone System, to create an open standard that could be used by cinematographers across devices, across manufacturers, and even across film and digital.
Yeah, that's just another example of mixing the light and using practicals. So yeah, the one with this one. So that was the interior of what you saw across the courtyard of the light, and then obviously the green is something that I created in the space in this X. The color temperature playing.
So we got another setup, very big setup. You mentioned that was the most lighting toys you ever had put on set? Yeah,
I've never been able to have that many lights, but one, we were these gigantic locations. The only way I could light, because we saw everywhere, was to light it from the exterior, and because it was COVID, they had all the lights. They had all the lights in-house, so they let me have them. So at one time I had almost 28 18Ks on 3 different locations pre-lighting.
So essentially, this is also not the full story, because even in that image you see some more 18Ks. So where is the available light? We got 3 trucks of available light. So. Jumping into that room?
Well, so one way, I was in this location for a big part of her story. So the only way I felt about it was that I have to change color, temperature, and different times of the day. So this was like towards the end of the production. We were all tired, so we'll shoot it in one shot. But I made it this late day coolness. And usually I use like quarter CTO on HMIs because I don't like the metallic look of the HMI. But here I took it off and I added blue to the HMI to create this kind of coolness.
And of course, you could do that with LED fixtures as well. But actually, if you dial in those colors, you often lack the brilliance. Because luminance and also spreading, due to the fact that you're powering your light through a physical substance with a gelled HMI, gives you a complete broader spectrum and a wider addition of the color you want to achieve compared to such like modern LED soft lights. That's probably the reason why also your wonderful gaffers, and you had 3 of them on the project, I think, went for a more classic big HMI approach.
Well, I don't know if they wanted to do it that way, but I did. No, I'm like, come from like, been doing this 50 years, so it took me years to use Kino flows. So I do like the Asteras, all right, but I don't like to make I think digitally, the LEDs kind of work, but for flesh tone on film, I'm not crazy about LEDs. So I'd rather go with HMIs and 3200 tungsten light because I know how the wavelength of those lights respond to flesh tone.
So, talking about tungsten.
Yeah, so many times the only place I could light was over chandeliers with china balls because they were very lightweight. Also, you're in historical areas, so you can't really be, rigging on the surface of things. And so they were very good at building me rigs off of the lights because they were so lightweight. And I'm just using basically 150 watt light bulbs.
So we see a bit more of that here.
Well, this was actually a library in Budapest that we shot this dance or this party scene, and there were like 15 watt LED bulbs, and I realized I could go up to 40 watts. So those are 640 40-watt bulbs, and that was enough illumination to light, which I was shooting XX negative, and XX negative is like 200 ASA. So, we all get used to 800 or 1280 or 1600, or now with Sony, you could go 3200. It's always a shock to then have to go back to shoot at 200 ASA. So I had just enough light to shoot at about a 2.8.
And speaking about the XX, how this turned out is visible here.
Yeah, and also I found the lighting was more, I tried to represent lighting more out of films in the 70s. So they were more open than I normally would light for the contrast. But what I realized, luckily, was everybody wore dark in this film. She wears dark coats and a hat. So actually lighting it more full, I still had the contrast by what people were wearing. So here's China balls again. In fact, when I put them up, Angelique would always go, "Oh no, not another China ball," but it ended up that way. So that's how it ended up, and then you pull back and they turn and talk to each other.
So and now, even you, who, from what we've discussed earlier, are venturing the world of masking your fixtures and VFX and putting light where it's not supposed to be?
Well, if you're going to end up shooting with 21 millimeters and 14, you got to put your light somewhere, right? So, that's a director, Pablo Larraín, and so I just made a decision and said, we're going to have to paint those lights out. And that's what we did.
So how it turned out?
Now,
I think it was worth the effort.
Now, in this situation, a lot of times, I did hide lights, but I used like par cans just bounced off the ceiling. And then again, showing the practical lights, giving the impression that that's really the way it was lit, even though it's lit because of the other ambient light in the room that I'm creating. So, here's, we brought in a spot. They had spots, but they weren't always as strong. And then the footlights were a big help for me. The only problem was I only had one type of footlight. So at some point we realized, all the stage scenes are going to have the same footlights, but no one seems to notice.
So some more setups?
Yeah, so again, this is supposedly New York, the St. Regis, and again, I just lit it with the China balls, and then I found this plastic tablecloth material, for picnic tables, and it's very lightweight, and so that would cut the light off of the walls. And then this was Greece, but the problem this day, or this is early in the morning when I got there, it rained. So again, I burned out the windows, if you go, so it ended up looking like this. So you wouldn't feel the overcast weather outside. And then that was another. And there's always smoke. Probably this shot, you feel the smoke more, but.
You were earlier speaking about Asteras.
Yeah, so the car shots, more and more I don't even use lights in car shots because, again, at least in film, there's so much latitude that you can get the interiors and still hold information outside. Again, with the zone system, and Sony has so much exposure latitude that you probably don't need lights unless it's very bright out. But I did want to implement just enough ambience so the lights aren't directly coming in, and I just used the stereotubes, again, because they were lightweight and we could rig, and also it was very overcast weather many times when we were shooting in Budapest, so I only needed a little ambiance to come in to help their faces. So this was a scene that you always wake up in the middle of the night and say, what do I need for tomorrow, right? So I realized they were going to probably send my one crane back that day and my one 20K. So the minute I got there in the morning, I said, oh, we still have the crane and the light. And they go, no, we sent it back. So I said, please, we need that, because I don't know what time of the day we're going to end up shooting this scene. And, you know, if we lose the light, I'm like, it's going to be a disaster for me. So an hour before we shot this scene, it arrived, because they had to drive it all the way across Budapest, and they had to have a permit and whatever. And then this scene ended up this way. And the lighting in the lanterns, that was for weeks figuring out what to do, because, you know, it's supposed to be like candlelight. So those ended up being the LED flicker lights with a battery pack. And that has a beautiful, thank God we did shoot it late in the day, because then that accentuated the Chinese lanterns. And then it's warmer. I warmed up the light. I said it was a 20K. I think it was a HMI 12K, and then I just warmed it up with like 85 and probably half.
With already
we're over.
With already our friends from Sony signaling us that we're a bit over time, we'll continue to actually the product that they're supporting, not only us but also you in the future with. It's the venerable Sony Venice 2, which was actually announced during Camera March here, how many years ago? 3 years ago? By Sebastian, actually, on stage, and Klaus. You probably all know the camera. It has been upgraded. Oh, I wouldn't go, because we have something very interesting in mind. Like, honestly, it's probably biggest mistake to leave the room now. But you'll know later what it is. But Ed has a surprise with him. So just to go quick into the Sony Venice 2, you all know it has a 50 megapixel, or other to say 8.6K 3x2 sensor that does wonderful 16-bit XOCN RAW, which makes me very happy, because XOCN is really very, very decent way of compensating for film negative. That's why it's also called original camera negative. That's where the name comes from. You have a multi-format camera supporting both full frame 3x2 for 1.5 time anamorphics. You have other anamorphic modes. You can shoot Super 35 in close to 6K resolution. You have an insanely fast readout speed. What does that mean? That CMOS reads its lines that fast that you won't really see rolling shutter anymore, because it's like roughly 2 seconds. Just to compare, that's close to a quarter to an eighth of that what competing high-end cinema cameras do. It's very low light sensitive. It has crazy amounts of dynamic range that you can toy around with, and it's just, in my view, probably the most versatile all-around high-end cinema camera. And the great thing about it is, it was announced 3 years ago. Sony's still supporting it with many future updates. There are features added, like high-speed modes with 120 frames in 4K that entered the camera after its release. And there's one new feature, and that is actually what brought us together with Sony. I think those discussions started still back in the days in Podczas, when Ed was still running around with like a color chart that he was handing out. I think Sepp still has one of them. Oh, yeah, now you're too fast, Ed. Too early. But too early. So yeah, just to go a bit into detail about the zone system, we all explained it like in lengths over the past years in seminars here. Still, probably not everybody knows it. It's essentially an exposure metering system, turning your camera into your most sophisticated exposure tool. You have colors, essentially a color heat map, showing you exposure in stops, like we all talk to each other. Nobody talks in IRE in percentage when they're discussing with a gaffer. At least we don't. Somebody talking percentages? No. So it is based on 18% gray. We went for plus and minus 6 stops with a half stop next to 18% gray because of just a better precision in lighting faces there, no matter of the skin tone. So we're actually try to be as inclusive there as we could be, especially also working with people all over the world in engineering terms, no matter if it's Japan, the United States, or Europe. And essentially, that is always the easiest way to put. I did the math. With a 4K 496 by 2160 sensor, you actually get roughly 8.9 million spot meters in that camera in the future. And it's really cool because it's not just like an announcement, despite I think the firmware only being officially released in May next year. Sony over-delivered. So can we change to that camera here, please? So actually, Sony over-delivered. We can make it a bit more specific, like those colleagues here over-delivered. And it's actually... So we actually see even already the scale on the side. You see also the areas where it would clip would be white, but the camera has too much dynamic range for this room, despite being running at 6,400 ASA and me having to stop down here to a 4. Yeah, some more Sony faces probably turn that off again in that regard. So thanks a lot to Sony, but also thanks to you guys, because without you being here at Camera Image, without you asking for those features, without you pushing manufacturers, and with actually some manufacturers still telling people that EL Zone system doesn't work, Sony proved it works. It works also in like the most high-end camera systems, and it works perfectly now. So I wonder why it's only being released in May, but that is a question you all have to ask Sony. Probably we can have it earlier. No, it's a really great thing, and we're very thankful for all your support pushing manufacturers. Probably, sorry Sony, but you could also push other manufacturers. We're very curious about your questions, but Ed, you're waiting.
One thing, it's more than 6 stops, because this was everyone saying, yeah, but some sensors are more than 6 stops. So there's the last color before the clipping on the over and the under that could be any amount of stops. It could be 2 more stops, 3 more stops, whenever they develop their sensors. Because what's important is understanding where it's going to clip. We're not going to be exposing something 7 or 8 stops and worrying about, do we have information or not. The most important part is from the 6 stops to the flesh tone, where you want to place it. That's why I do the half stop on either side of the 18% gray, because on one side or the other is going to be where you want to place your flesh tone. And for me, the flesh tone is always the most important, because if you base where your exposure is on the flesh tone, you know how much you want to be dark or light in the rest of your set. At least that was my way of thinking when I started out, that I would always understand where I want to place the exposure on the face, and then I knew how bright or dark I want the surroundings or the environment to be.
And how good Sony's implementation actually is, and that is exactly what Ed was just pointing out. Like the last stop, the light purple or the dark, the light rosé or the light dark purple actually show you probably even 4, 5, 6 stops beyond the 6th stops. It's just saying 6 stops and beyond whatever there is in terms of information, and then it cuts to wide. It could also happen that you have an inferior camera that you probably will not ever see the red color because it's wide after the yellow, because you're probably shooting on a very small action camera or whatever, and somehow hook that up to, for example, a small HD screen. And it's really interesting to have that feature on a camera like the Sony Venice, where you can determine your latitude yourself above and below neutral gray by choosing the ASA. For example, you can, if you're all about your highlights and protecting them in an image, you can set the base ISO to 800 and expose for 3200. So you gain some latitude in the highlights. If you want to protect your blacks, just set your base ASA to 800 and go 2 stops lower and expose for 200 ASA. So it's very interesting what you can do there also regarding of your project. The great factor is Sony's implementation of the EL zone system even factors that in and shows you that different shift of latitudes depending on which base ASA you choose and which actual ASA you dial in there. So well done for that part. That was the most wonderful thing for me to notice, that this already worked here. And now, yeah, we were saying thank you to you guys. We were saying thank you to Sony. And yet now it's your surprise time. Sorry. No, sorry, we need Bella. So please welcome.
But she's got to understand what. So here is the stuff. Bella, my daughter, is a future cinematographer, is going to be moving around. I'm going to be looking at the wall, and then when I say stop, we have 10 of these to give out. You say if you're extra large, medium, or small, and there'll be a give out.
So. And whoever wants a signature from whoever wants a signature from Ed can come afterwards and get it also signed. So just let us know.
So let me know when you're going.
Bella, please feel free to move. Oh, we need the camera on the screen, please. Ed, you're not allowed to start yet.
Tell me when we're starting.
Bella is starting. She's already like checking out. What? Move. Keep it interesting, Bella.
And stop.
Who's that? Lucky man? Who's on the red dot? Like we actually to make it fair, we put the red center marker in there. So to avoid confusion, Sony was kind enough.
So we keep going, right?
We can keep going. Like just be honest afterwards, collecting.
All right.
So that's number one. Number two, Bella.
And stop.
Oh. So actually, Ed, we have two somehow. Like, both of you get one. Like, the Mr. in front of you, like Bella shot through his shoulder there. So it's both of you. Feel free. Those are yours. Ed, we need two more. Oh, we got 10. Oh, then it's 8 more.
All right. And cut.
Oh, no, I think that's again. Nancy, you get yours afterwards. It's the gentleman behind you. So, yeah, Ed, we're moving again.
Tell me when action.
There's action already. Bella is hard on action.
And cut.
Oh, lucky man. So we got another one. Bella is moving again. So, you're ready, Ed. Yeah. So we have another two, I think, to be fair. We already have people doing yoga here, Ed, to get in line. So, oh. And I think one more, Ed.
And cut.
Oh. You know what? We have enough 3, all of you 3 in that line. Like the wonderful guy with the glasses, the guy who bends his head as much as he can, and the other one with the glasses behind. So it's all of you 3. So thank you so much. Thank you to Sony. There were a couple of people who were tremendously involved on Sony's side. There are so many Sony people here today. I would point out from my side, Imagawa-san, who I was allowed to bother every day, like day in, day out, responding night and day, coordinating German time zone, Tokyo time zone, and New York or Los Angeles wasn't that easy always. But Ed, you also had some people you want to say thank you to?
Nobu-san? And Kabuchan? Kabuchan, oh yeah.
And Ueda-san. Yasuo Ueda.
All right.
And then we do have the camera out on our stand, so you can actually look at EL Zone and you'll be able to see it again in a beta software. We also have beta software of the Burano, so an update to that as well. I encourage you to tell us what you like about our cameras, share projects that you've shot. It gives our engineers encouragement. They really like to hear the good stuff. And then give them the other stuff. I really would like it if it did this, because that's how we get the next level. So show your appreciation of what they've already done and tell us what you want next. Thank you very much.